Good evening, everyone. As you know, I'm Stefano Carpani, Jungian psychoanalyst and sociologist, and I'm very, very happy tonight to have Chiara Giaccardi Mauro Magatti, my godmother and godfather in terms of sociology. They are connecting from Como, Italy, you know, where George Clooney also has a big villa. They have a big villa too, but their villa is very interesting because many people live there. They will tell us something about it. Who is Chiara? Chiara is a professor of media, sociology, and anthropology at the Catholic University in Milan, and she's the director of Comunicazione Sociale, which is a very important magazine. Mauro is professor of sociology, also at the Catholic University of Milan. He's the director of the Center for Anthropology of Religion and Cultural Change. He is an editorialist for Corriere della Sera. They're both very active, I would say even activist. Engaged politically. Chiara was part of the Synodo for Youth a couple of years ago. They have 5 kids, plus 2, because they adopted 2 kids. And in the past 2 years, you know, because they haven't got much to say, they wrote 2 new books. The last one is this one, Nella fine l'inizio. In the end, the beginning, or at the end, the beginning, which is a sentence from Eliot, and it talks about Italy through the pandemic. And I would even say a psychosocial look at the pandemic. Tonight we will talk about individuation, of course, because almost everyone here is Jungian. We will talk about social generativity, so starting from Erik Erikson, perhaps. But I will start with asking a very simple question to both Mauro and Chiara. What is social generativity?
It's not easy to define in few words, but what we can say for starting, for the beginning, is that social generativity is a relational paradigm. We thought about a critique of the consumer society, but we didn't want to substitute consumption with generation. We think that consumption is an original anthropological act to get things to put inside, but our experience, our familiarity with a lot of scholars like Hannah Arendt, Georg Simmel, Romano Guardini, and many others, helped to focus on another original movement, anthropologically original, which is generating, which is putting out, make something exist beyond ourselves. And these 2 movements are complementary, but the thing is that consumption has been promoted, has become structural to economics life, but also to social life, because to realize themselves, to find their place in the world, to get in touch with reality. But this unilateral overemphasis on consumption and on individuality, like as the as how can I say, the condition of consumption, because I am a consumer and I consume things, places, people, resources, and so on. So society has been built, techno-capitalistic society has been built for overemphasizing consumption, and thanks to this movement. And also becoming themselves has been presented as consuming things and being free to consume as a way of self-affirmation. And our attempt was to compensate this view with another original view, not ideological, not critical in the abstract sense of simply opposition, but a complementary movement from which a critique of overemphasis on consumption is possible. So social generativity is a relational paradigm for social change based on the original movement of making something exist, to exist. Hannah Arendt called it natality. And in so doing, becoming ourselves, becoming themselves. Because by bringing something into the world, by taking care of it, and most important, by let it go, we become ourselves and we co-individuate thanks to what or who we have brought into the world.
May I add just a few words to what Chiara has said?
Yeah,
we may say that social generativity has one mother and one father. The mother is Hannah Arendt. We took a lot from her. You know that her idea of freedom has to do with this idea of putting someone into the world. And this positive attitude, we think that is essential to overcome the consumeristic society where we live in. And the father is Erik Erikson. When he suggested that after the exploration phase of life, everyone is facing a crisis and a dilemma between self-absorption and generativity. And generativity simply is the way in which we participate in the growing of the world. And the second point I would like to stress, to clarify what Chiara said, is a relational paradigm for social change, is that we recover this notion of generativity, generativity. We have lost the meaning of this term, which comes from Latin, but more exactly from Greek, where the verb gignomai, which is not genai, which is the biological act of giving life. Gignomai is the verb which in the ancient time had the place which in contemporary life has the verb to do. Is a very wide, has a very wide meaning, and has to do with this relational process of recreating life. So consumption is incorporation, and generation is something more than simply production, because has to do with the other, and so explain why we stress the relational point of generation. We tend to lose this meaning because after industrialization, we reduce this movement of exteriority to a movement of domination of the world. Production is different from generation because in production you dominate what you put into the world. in generation, you are in an unstable relation with the other. And so you enter in a dynamism which is essential for individuation.
Before to ask the next question, tonight we do it like this more than a paper. Let me thank Chiara, because 2 days ago she got the vaccine and she didn't feel so good. So I'm really thankful to Chiara for being here. And especially because among the two, Chiara is the most Jungian. Mauro is more Lacanian, but I'm trying to work to change his perspective. And as sociologists, you know, they represent this category that has told us that the world shifted toward individualism in the past 20, 30, 40 years. But we Jungians have in our heart another concept. There is a process of individuation. As far as I understand, social generativity gives priority to the process of individuation over the product of individuality. In fact, in my PhD thesis, I borrow from you the idea that in an individualized society, we need individuation to really become free or absolute free. What do you mean when you say that we need to give priority to individuation over the product of individuality?
As long as we are alive, we stay in this process of becoming ourselves, and this process is never ended. And I think we believe that the idea of individual as something with an identity, with something with a stable identity is very dangerous. And in this perspective, we are very close, for instance, to Bernard Stiegler, who was saying that people until the end of their life are within this process of becoming themselves, and this process is structurally relational. Mm-hmm. And this process is possible thanks to a charge of pre-individuality, and in this I see very much, I see many connection with Jung. All the pre-individuality we carry with us, and which is the condition for our individuation, and also the condition of our metastability, because each stage of our life is neither stable nor unstable, but is metastable. That is, we reach temporary equilibrium, a form which is never able to host all the life we carry with us. So this is the condition for change, and individuation is change. Is change thanks to our encounter, our relation with the pre-individuality we carry with us, with other people, with the milieu, with the environment. And in this process, we become ourselves. And this process ends with our death. So as long as we are alive, and Goethe was saying that what is alive changes. As long as we are alive, we carry on this process of individuation, of becoming ourselves, reaching metastable equilibrium, and as a starting point for further step of individuation. And this is a relational dynamic, because also, as Stiegler was saying, individuation is always co-individuation. For instance, if I am a teacher, or if I am an educator, if I am a parent, and I enter in a relationship with cannot be symmetrical, because symmetry is an abstraction when we talk about human relationship. Symmetry is a property of mathematical, geometrical objects which are constructed, but people are never symmetrical. Even the two halves of our face are not symmetrical. So symmetry is not a property of human relationship, but asymmetry can be the occasion for domination or the occasion for generation. If we enter in a relationship of co-individuation, and while I try to transmit what I have learned as important to other people, to offer them the capability, the instruments, the symbolic resources to become generative in turn. In this movement, I can individuate myself, and I enter in a dynamic of co-individuation. And as a teacher, as a professor, I can say that when I try to explain to my students what I've learned, the important things is not to transfer the content, but is to transfer the sense of astonishment, the sense of meraviglia, I don't know the term, but surprise. You feel when you discover something. So if you are able to transmit in the same act of transmission, you re-individuate yourself while co-individuate with your students. And this is the work of education, and is the way in which individuation works as co-individuation, which produce new meaning. This is not a mere transfer of knowledge, but is also a metastabilization of knowledge for further individuation.
Yes, I would like to stress another point, to say the same thing with different words again, using still the ancient language. In modern language, we have just active and passive. And this is a big problem. It's a real problem. Or we are active, so we are the subject, doing things, transforming the world, reaching the goal. Or we are passive, we are subjugated by the facts, we suffering the reality, and blah, blah, blah. In Latin and Greek, we have the deponent form, and the deponent form are very interesting because they are in the middle. They are passive declination with active meaning. And that's very important for us, because social generativity is typically a deponent action, where there is a mixture between active and activity and passivity. The actor is following his project, his meaning, his desire, or whatsoever. But the fact is that in the relationship with the reality, with the other, is continuously moved towards a different position. And the individuation, or better, this co-individuation, is this continuous process of negotiation with reality, where I put myself into the world through putting other into the world.
Thank you, Chiara. Thank you, Mauro. Feel free to send us your questions through the chat. I really enjoyed the bit on social generativity is relational. In fact, the most advanced psychoanalytical studies look at relational psychoanalysis. There was nothing happen if there is a relationship between the two, you know, and going back to Winnicott or even Masood Khan. And the third, where actually I can help my patient if I'm open and active and receptive. Another thing, when I was reading your stuff 3-4 years ago, I thought, hey, what these two sociologists are talking about is really the art of psychoanalysis. put something into the world that is the relationship with the patient, accompany the relationship through treatment, and then let it go. This is, for me, very, very important. Your example with being a teacher, being a professor in the series is really the same. And you know how accompaniment is important for me. So you say that social generativity as qualified individuation, and that you can say that generative individuation produces at least 3 relational effects for social change. 1, a relation between the self and others. 2, a temporal effect, and a contextual effect. What are these 3 steps?
As a premise, we can say that consumption society and techno-capitalistic society is an entropic society, where entropy has 2 main features. One is fragmentation, and the other is de-differentiation, homogenization, homologation. And the philosopher Cornelius Castoriadis was saying that who says that do what he wants, in fact, do what everyone else is doing. So we think to be free, but in fact we are not, and we behave at the same way than other people, even in the transgressions. So social generativity is a negantropic movement, is a movement of both recomposition of the fragmentation and of differentiation, because individuation is a way of becoming themselves and while expressing his own uniqueness, while deepening the understanding of themselves while understanding others and the world. And we were able to identify, studying different cases, case studies, and in the circulation between theory and practice, research and theoretical reflection, we were able to identify 3 negantropic effects. One has to do with the relation between people, and we have is an effect of transitivity. We have called authorization, and is the typical example is the relationship between teacher and pupil, or parent and kids, and the relation imply a difference in power, in status, in competencies, in skills. But this difference is not played in the direction of the domination, but in the direction of capacitation and generativity. And in this relation, there is a reciprocity, is not one-sided, and the reciprocity involves the desire that the people, the person I am teaching, I am educating, will be able in turn to become generative, to become able to help other people to flourish. So this is a transitivity in the sense that I do my best because the other can become the author of his own life and can become a generative subject in turn. And this is a relation in which the asymmetry is played for capacitation rather than domination. Another negantropic effect has to do with the recomposition of the dimension of time, past, present, and future, because generativity is based, and there is a lot of Hannah Arendt in that, is based on gratitude, because Hannah Arendt said that we have been put into the world so we can put something into the world, and we receive life so we can give life to others. And Transtemporality is an entropic effect in which we feel gratitude for what we have received, like an heritage, and this foster a sense of responsibility for who will come after us. Gratitude is the basis of morality. I cannot remember if it was Simon who used to say that, but generativity receives something from the past, take care of it, transform it, metastabilize it, and transmit to the further generation because they can become generative in turn. So the three dimensions of time are recomposed in a unique flow of life. And the third effect, we can call it trans-individuality or exemplarity, because there is a kind of normativity in social generativity, but it's a light normativity in the sense that generative social action is a sort of instigation to individuation. Is not a model to be replied, to be replicated, but is a kind of stimulus to find your own way to individuate, for your own way towards individuation. So is really something that can contribute to generate meaning, to generate sense, to generate new meaning, that new symbols that can circulate, that can become the basis for further individuation from other people.
If I may add two ideas. The first is that social generativity basically has to do with the relationship between life and death. This is the core of social generativity. So it's nothing to do with goodwill. It has to do with the fact that life and death are closely linked. It's impossible to avoid this link. And in fact, in many cases we have studied, a generative attitude stem from a trauma. When you have lost everything, sometimes it could happen that you start to being extremely generative because you don't fear to lose nothing. You have already lost everything, and so you become able to live in this way of in this relational way in which your individuation has to do with the other and with the surrounding context. It's not a conflict between you and the rest of the world. So this is the first point. And the second point is that social generativity has to do with the deep meaning of being free, with freedom. If I am free, if I love freedom, we think, at the end of the story, I cannot be free, I cannot practice freedom without thinking that my act at the end is an opportunity for other people being free as well. That is, it's contradictory for freedom to destroy freedom. And this is very important for social generativity because it's not a Kantian duty, but it's something which has to do with what you love more. Freedom, the search for yourself, the relationship with the world, and because you understand that this is very important for you, you cannot contradict this your vocation. And that's why being generative, which is not just a matter of a personal life, but it's a matter of the way in which, for instance, organization may be structured. Being free yourself has to do with the freedom of others.
Mauro, before we open the floor to our guests, to the public, you are also an economist, you are an advisor to politician, the former Prime Minister of Italy. How can social generativity be expanded or can involve, like, for example, economics? You work on economical generativity. How can your idea be applied to the system, to the institutions, and not just to the soul, for example?
Is not a matter of applying. Yes. My answer to this question is a Weberian one. One of my friends, Luc Boltanski, a French sociologist, wrote a book 20 years ago on the new spirit of the new capitalism, the consumerist, individualistic one. Everyone knows what Weber has written about the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. So I think that the way out from this dramatic crisis, not just the COVID, but the chaos in which the planet is deepening, has to do with the looking for a different spirit. Of course, we don't pretend saying that social generativity is the future, but I think that was the starting point of our research. We think that we need to look for something which has an anthropological deepness comparable with production and consumption. To move forward, we cannot accept nothing less profound. And our suggestion, our humble suggestion, is that if we intend a generation, of course, not as a biological action, but as a cultural symbolic movement which has to do with individuation as co-individuation, we may suggest that the cultural evolution of our society may be interested in this kind of perspective. And it's very, if you like, it's everyone may see that in our life, maybe the people who is listening this conversation are professionals, and we all know that our individuation has nothing to do with consumption nor with production, but at the end of the story, with expressing ourselves, making other people find their own freedom. And we suggest that the recovery of this idea of generation, which, as I said before, comes from the Greek society, may be useful in thinking a different future.
Thank you, Mauro. This makes me feel of, remember of Jung when said, being whole, feeling you whole is also a matter of feeling calm and reassured. And this is the feeling you have after a dream is well interpreted. Or with Winnicott, that bliss that the true self brings with everything comes together. Now I'm happy to open the floor to our colleagues. Thank you for your inspirational presentation, although it was a conversation. Paul, you have a question. You are the only one allowed to ask it live.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm cheating to get to speak live. I am thinking of various constraints. They're probably very familiar to you. I suspect you've been asked these questions 1,000 times. there is anxiety around fluid identity across our culture. It seems to be a cultural complex, anxiety that especially young people choose their values, lives, and genders, etc. I know that I teach at a university, so I tend to value that, champion that with my students, but I know that there's a lot of anxiety from them of, are they allowed to do this? Are they safe? So what are these counter forces? Would you also see these in social terms?
Well, it's very, of course, difficult because to answer to this question, because I understand very well what you are saying about this anxiety, about the idea of being fluid, which is also something which is at the core of a new sort of moral sense among the youngsters, especially. We say that in this movement there are aspects which may be worrying because people risk losing themselves. But at the same time, I think that this sense of fluidity suggests the idea that people is in search of something. Social generativity, as we said before, is a process. This is very important for us. Is a process, and it's a way which help people to understand that fluidity is simply the subjective adaptation to hyper-complex system. And the problem is that for us is that the forces, the social forces, are larger than we usually think. In Italy, we have worked a lot in these years on social generativity in the field, and we discovered that there is a diffused sense of creating life, organization, groups, movements, social experiences, which may help people to give shape to their own life, give shape in a dynamic way. And social generativity, in fact, is something which corresponds to this expectation. And so there are no social forces in terms of groups, classes, or whatsoever. But we may say, at least as we can see in Italy, we may say that there is a diffused attention towards something which may help to live fluidity, not to move towards stability, but to transform fluidity in this idea of something which is a movement in life, but at the same time, something which is able to give sense to your own life.
If I can add something, the good thing is that they understand that being is becoming, that life is continuous change, but the risk is liquidity, and the challenge is this dynamic, this positive dialectic between form and life, the one which Georg Simmel was thinking about many years ago. And for the same reason, he was saying that life is an adventure because the future is something which cannot be written in advance and deduced for premises. And adventure is when we lose control, but at the same time we move toward a direction. So the challenge is to balance form and life, and to find form that are not stable but metastable, because without form, life is liquid and can be not. We cannot live in liquidity. So we need form, but we need form that are open to change. And this idea of metastability, I think, is crucial, because is against any dualism between stability and instability. The reaction to stability is not instability, because it's equally negative, is equally enemy of life. The challenge is to find metastability. So form that we know are not perfect, we know are temporary, but we know are necessary for making a step ahead.
Yes, the idea of metastability has to do with potentiality. Each step you may reach still have a potential. And so you never end this process of becoming.
There's a question from Barbara Miller, and she gives a context saying that her PhD was in anthropology, basically on shamanism. Then she trained to become a psychoanalyst, a Jungian psychoanalyst at the Carl Gustav Jung Institute in Zurich, where also Paul Bernard and I trained. She underlined that Joe Cambray, which is past president of the International Association of Analytical Psychology, a very prominent Jungian, during the last conference, international conference in Vienna, suggested that the society's culture that maintains stability keep on active oracle practice. This makes me think, or this make Barbara think strongly on your comments, social generativity and co-individuation. Can you comment on that? Social generativity and co-individuation.
It is a way to understand, is a way to express the fact that relation is not the product of the will of an individual who decide to connect to another individual, but co-individuation is the recognition of the fact that we are relation before being individual. And this is what Simondon was calling the realism of relation. And we indicate this fact with what we call the paradox of, come si dice ombelico in inglese?
Oh, non lo so. Belly button.
In the
belly
center
button.
of the belly, we have a hole that reminds us that, so it's written on our flesh, a sign of the fact that we were relation before being able to breathe with our own lungs, to work with our own legs, and so on. So the relation is the condition of individuality, and the relation is the condition of individuation, of becoming ourselves, becoming themselves. And this is not a one-side movement, because, for instance, as a mother, I give birth to kids and I individuate myself in giving birth to them, but then they are other than me, and in the relationship that they establish with me, I am involved, I am forced to change, and in this dynamic we co-individuate. Any relationship is not an exchange, but is a process in which the people involved with themselves, with the environment, change, transform themselves, and co-transform themselves. And this is we think is a revolutionary way to consider social change, because reciprocity is inherent to this process. It's not a matter of already made individual that build, that make contracts, that is a transformation, is a change that involve people in this reciprocity among themselves and with the environment. And every element is transformed in this relationship. Relationship is never neutral, is always something which create a dynamic, a process of transformation, of metamorphosis.
By recognizing this relational feature of our life, many consequences may come. Certainly, we live in modern society. We have refused traditional obligation. Yeah. And the consequence is that in contemporary life, in advanced democracies, it's very hard to find a mutual obligations, something we may ground the mutual obligation. We may say that from what Chiara is saying, that the obligation between us comes exactly from the fact that no one may exist alone. And in fact, we are ourselves thanks to others, as others are themselves thanks to us. And this is the fabric of social life, in fact. And we mentioned Hannah Arendt, we mentioned Erik Erikson. As you noted, we used so much also Georg Simmel and his main disciple, which is Bauman, who was a teacher of us. And Simmel has very strong this idea that there is a co-determination between the individual and the social context. And we do think that this relational approach is essential to understand social life.
There's a question by Fabrizio Petri. Since Erikson's most famous work is on nonviolence, Gandhi's truth, how do you see the relation between social generativity and nonviolence? But I will ask you a shorter answer.
No, very short. I tried, before I said that it's because we love freedom for ourselves that we are forced to diffuse freedom to others through our action. Otherwise, we fall in a deep contradiction with our own in relationship with our love for freedom. So that's why I think that social generativity is deep connected with the idea of nonviolence.
I like very much the next question from Carol Cunningham, especially because 3 weeks ago was the Sunday Gospel was about Jesus in the desert being tempted by the devil. So Carol is asking, where is the place for solitude and the hermit in social generativity?
Solitude.
Well, I don't know if I have an answer, but what is solitude? Because you can be alone in a desert or alone in contemplation and meditation, but you can be open to transcendence, or you can read things and be in a dialogue with the thinking of other people or with the scriptures. So solitude is, I believe that under a certain respect is impossible for people, because as long as we think, our thoughts are dialogues with an heritage, with the thinking of scholars or prophets, or is openness to something other than ourselves. As long as we are open to other than ourselves, can be nature, can be God, it can be literature, poetry or everything. As long as we are open, we are in a generative attitude, in a potentially generative attitude.
And I don't know if the question was intended to make this point, but when we stress this relational fabric of social life and even of the individual through individuation and co-individuation, we don't say that there is no individual. That is, Simondon uses the terms of transduction, which means the fact that the subject is able to give an unexpected answer to the condition, the situation, and so we don't assume that we assume that social life and personal life is deeply involved in this relational fabric, but at the same time, what is specific of social life is that the individual is still able to make a movement which is unexpected. And for Simmel, this co-determination, which is not at the same time a determination, is what is specific of the human being, of social life.
There's a question from Paolo Ferliga. From an economic point of view, what relationship is there between the paradigm of generativity and the economy of the gift of which Serge Latouche speaks?
Of course, there are relationships, but Latouche, the gift economy is focused on the gift, while social generativity is focused on the initiative of the subject and the relational circle which the subject is able to create. So is a different point of view. Let me say also that social generativity, we consider this idea important in this specific historic time where we heard every day to talk about sustainability and digitalization. And we usually say that sustainability and digitalization may bring us to a dystopic world of surveillance, of big power, of centralization. And we may suggest that the pharmacon is exactly social generativity. That is, we may go towards sustainability and digitalization by reinforcing social forms which are able to support real individuation. And this is, in a sense, a political idea.
The next question from Dennis Merit is very interesting because actually the answer is this one, is your book. He asks, can you comment on the effect the pandemic has had on individualism, society, and the sense of community and social generativity? Before you answer, I want to underline something, that there are sociologists that write books, but also are activists. And I believe that also psychoanalysts should be activists, following Andrew Samuels. And Mauro and I, with a group of his collaborators from the Catholic University of Milan, last March, got together and launched a project called Next Generation Italy. Then the Europeans launched the Next Generation EU. And actually, our intent was to ask the under 40, so the next generation of Italians, to send proposal for a new vision of Italy. The project still goes on and is really a psychosocial movement, a psychosocial exercise, engaging especially the younger generation, that goes beyond theory. Anyway, let's going back to Dennis. Can you comment on the effect the pandemic has had on individualism, society, and the sense of community and social generativity?
In a sense, pandemic has been a kind of lens that allowed to see the contradiction of the previous model of techno-capitalism and hyper-individualism. Also a lens that magnifies the risks in this moment, especially if we describe the situation and the possible best future as a restarting. That means not recognizing the enormous catastrophic effects of pandemics on our society, but also the possibilities that can emerge, can be open by this trauma, because trauma is literally a hit, something that open a blesser, ferita.
A wound.
A wound, which is also a passage towards a different perspective. So if we don't, if we are not able to take this possibility, this opportunity, the present will be and the future will be catastrophic.
Yeah.
If we are able to transform this wound in a positive way, in a vital catastrophe, as Ernesto De Martino in Italian anthropology will say, we can hope. Is not at all something which is certain, but we can hope to regenerate our social life and our interpersonal life and our economic life.
John Robinson, who was one of the most important British economists, suggested that external shocks are essential to push dramatic transformations, and also to push the social organizations and the economies in a phase of evolution. There is nothing automatic, and but certainly from this point of view, the pandemic opened a new space for the future. We in the book we refer, of course, metaphorically, we refer to the consequences of the two world wars in the last century, which had opposite effects. The first World War left a number of social and economic problems, instability, uncertainties, and the 20s were a period when the bad ideologies we know were able to grow, and from a disaster came out a bigger disaster. The Second World War produced, in fact, a very different path, and after the dramatic end of the war, at least in Europe and the United States, we had a period of relative social flourishing with a new equilibrium between the economy, the democracy, and the social inclusion. Not a paradise, but something which was certainly better than what happened in the 20s. And in a sense, we are in this edge between the 20s and the 50s. That is, we say that after this pandemic, the world is already changed, and we don't know yet if this is for the best or for the worst.
Thank you, Mauro. Thank you, Chiara. You know, I didn't tell you, but you are the first non-Jungian who joined Psychosocial Wednesday. It was an experiment, and I think it was a wonderful experiment because your insight, knowledge really added something to our ongoing conversation since last year. The floor is for you for your concluding remarks, and I'm really, really grateful that you were with us tonight.
No, I thank you, Stefan, of course, for this invitation. We love a lot to debate with other discipline. We are influenced by, as you said, by some Lacanians, but we love a lot Jung as well. And in fact, social generativity, if I may make a statement which is linked with Jung, has to do with this idea that we cannot think to dominate fully our life and the reality. That there is part of ourselves, of course, but part also of the world outside ourselves, which is far away from our domination. And social generativity has to do with this process of individuation, which avoid this temptation to dominate the reality. And I think that this idea is not far away from what Jung has tried to suggest.
And I want to conclude by stressing that social generativity is a way of individuation in which freedom is renewed, because we think about freedom as consumption, as taking as more possibilities as we can. And in fact, we are in the condition now, and the pandemic is put us in the condition to express another idea of freedom as the capacity to bring something new into the world, to make something to exist which is not already there. And so it is a call for creativity, for generativity. And I think this task can be something able to move, to push the young generation and to involve them in a process of, in a trans-individual process of co-individuation. And I'd like to conclude with a quote of Romano Guardini, which is a theologian, but also a philosopher, very close to Simmel in his understanding of the relationship between life and form, and very strong in the opposition of any dualism. He rather speak about polar tension between opposition that are not exclusive one of another, but they keep themselves, they are co-essential. And he says, and I want to conclude with this phrase, in which I believe a lot. He says, life is fruitfulness, and the more life is alive, the greater is its strength to present what does not yet exist. So if we are alive, our task is to present what does not yet exist. And thank you for inviting us.
Thank you. Ciao. A presto. I'll see you here in 2 weeks. We're back with Psychosocial Wednesday. Again, a book launch. Renate Daniel presenting her book about the self. Please come back. Thank you again, Chiara. Thank you again, Mauro. Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you very much, Jungians.
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 Ciao. Ciao.